Okay, it's December 5th, 2009. I'm Richard L. Messenger along with my sister Linda Messenger, and we're here to interview our father, Richard S. Messenger. We have a list of questions, a lot of which deal with past family history and so forth, and we're just going to kind of work our way through here and see where the questioning leads. And hopefully we'll get some good footage there for John to work with. So we'll just start with the basics, and this may be kind of obvious, but just for the camera's sake, what is your full name that you were given at birth?
It's Richard Sherman Messenger.
Do you know where or why Grandma named you any of those particular names?
I don't know where she picked the Richard, but the Sherman was from her dad, William S. Brannaman, and I think it was Sherman, William Sherman Brannaman, I believe.
So that was
That's Mother's dad,
that would have been your grandfather.
my grandfather.
Okay, and did you know him?
I knew him. He lived in Wichita. Real nice guy. He lived in Wichita. He worked at the Postal Service, post office, and he was married to Goldie's, my mother's. That was my mother's mother, so, and then that was the dad.
Okay, so
And,
when
Isa was her name, and he moved out here. I can't remember the year, but he moved out here. We went back, and we came back from Wichita, drove back, pulling the table that's in the den in the living room. And we brought that back with us. We brought back that toolbox that I gave you, Linda, and a bunch of things like that. And he lived in the little house behind 1024 Rialto, the little house, and he passed away there.
And the table, what's special about the table?
Well, the table, he made the table in 1930, and he made it primarily because he was a woodworker and he enjoyed working with wood.
it was a hobby because he worked for the Postal
Yeah, it was a
Service?
hobby on the side, and I guess he made that mainly, though, tried to get it finished so that they could take it to the World's Fair. Then when Mom and Dad, Goldie and Herman, and he and the table and Isa went to the fair in Chicago to take it there, then I stayed with Aunt Laura in Wichita for, I don't know, 10 days or so. So that's about all I can. I was just a little squirt then.
Well, just to backtrack slightly, though, exactly when...
That was in 1933, I believe.
Exactly when and where were you born?
Santa Barbara, California. December 9, 1927.
And both of your parents' names were, just to have it on our
Yeah, they
record
were Goldie L. Messenger and Herman N. Messenger.
here. And what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Brannaman.
What were the middle names?
L.
No, not the initials, the names.
I don't know what it was. It was
Oh, you
just
don't?
L. And like my dad, it was Herman N. Messenger, and we never did get a answer out of him all the time I knew him. What the N stood for, have no idea. So I don't know. It's kind of a...
How old were you? Do you know how old your parents were when they had you?
how old my parents were.
Yeah, when your mother you gave birth, how
Oh.
old was she?
No, I can't. Well, Dad was born in 1900, I believe, and Mother 1901, I believe. So they had Dawn in Wichita, and then they moved out here, and so that would be that'd be they were 27, 26, 27, something like that.
Then going back a minute, what is your age today?
Well, next Wednesday it'll be 82.
And then also, what was the full name of grandparents, your grandparents on both sides of the family? Just so we have a...
Grandparents, well, it would be Isa on mother's side. Isa Crumpacker. She was remarried to Summer Crumpacker. And I remember taking you kids to the park in Ontario when you were small, and Crumpacker was there. In fact, Crumpacker, deviating like somebody I know, Crumpacker, his kids owned all the property where Montclair Center's at
Montclair Plaza.
at that time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's, mom's side. Dad's side, I met, I met Dad's mother in Wichita, and that was, I'm trying to think, her name was Lillian, I believe. And she was remarried to somebody else. And Grandpa's name was Jesse Messenger, and he was married to Viola. That was his second wife. They lived across the street from us on 1024. But
that was Grandpa's father, your grandfather.
yeah, and he was a real nice man. He was so jealous he couldn't see straight, but he was a nice guy. Really, and he was married to Viola Messenger, but his mother lived in Wichita. I don't know whatever happened there. I think that they must have had Dad and separated before. I think they separated even before he was born, because neither Lillian or Jesse raised Dad. He was raised by somebody else. I think he was raised by some friends.
Yeah,
not even a relative.
that's always been a little confusing because of the fact that Grandpa had all these half brothers, and
Well, the half brothers and half sisters of my dad was, it was Joe and Melvin and Sam and there was two others, and they were
Floyd.
from Floyd, and they were from Jesse was the dad, and Viola was the mother.
Jesse,
Viola was an excellent woman. She was really nice. I remember one time when your mother and we stayed at their house across the street because I was out of work. I didn't have any work at all. Times were tough, just like they are today. I don't know if they were worse then, but I'm talking in the 48, 49. And that's before we had you two kids. We stayed with Jesse and Viola's at their house across the street from Mom and Dad. So that was interesting, and we learned a lot.
Well, to backtrack a little bit then, so you were born in Santa Barbara, but you soon left and went to Kansas. Can you tell us?
No, we didn't go to Kansas.
Well, you said you visited there or something.
We only, Dad and Mom went there a lot. I mean, seemed like they went there every year. But they never, when they moved to Santa Barbara, they never lived there ever again.
Okay. Well, fill us in and...
Unless they might have, they had Don, I can't answer that. I think Don could. But when they moved to Santa Barbara and then they had me, work was, that was during the Depression. And so they got a job in San Bernardino, and that's why we ended up in San Bernardino, because he got a job through Jesse and Viola at Broomcrest and Wiedemann.
Well, fill us in on your early adolescent years and growing up, like say, up until you were a teenager, about where you grew up and what it was like and all that.
Well, I'm trying to remember, we moved to San Bernardino in 34, 35, and so I was 7 years old when we moved there, and so then I started going to school there, and I went to Edison. Well, I went to another school, and then I went to Edison, and that's where I went until I got out of grammar school. Then I went to Richardson Junior High, which is right down south of Rialto. Then I went to San Bernardino High School, which was the only one at that time. I guess there's about 4 or 5 now, right? And,
There's somewhere around 4, I think.
4 of them. So
3 or 4.
went there.
What was it like growing up? What kind of
It was.
childhood memories do you have?
I grew up during the time of the starting of World War II, and so it was kind of tough. We didn't. It's in the schools. You didn't have any books or any paper or anything. It was really scarce as far as supplies for the children. And I guess I'll never forget, this is one thing that really stuck to my mind when we were going to school in some of the classes, social classes. It was a science class, and they always talked about how to build a toilet that you have in the backyard, something that we would have never done and never talked about. And I said to myself, what are they talking about this stuff for? How ridiculous. But that's because the books were so old, they were antiquated. So anyway, that's just one of those things that stuck with me.
So they wanted to teach you how to build a toilet in your backyard.
Yeah.
Like an outhouse?
Yeah, an outhouse.
That was self-contained.
And self-contained. They showed you how to build it and where to build it, the topographical map, how to do it. I thought, how ridiculous. They can teach us something better than that. So anyway, that's the way it happened.
Do you remember any particular teacher?
Oh, yeah, I remember in junior high in Richardson one time I I built a drafting board, and it was all glue. This was in the wood shop, and I built it and made it, and Mr. Carlson was his name, and and it was finished, ready for me to bring home, and this Mr. Carlson, I said something or did something that he didn't like, and so I was holding it, and he took a hammer and hit it right in the middle, put a big dent in it, and I thought, how ridiculous, you know. I never forget him. Then I remember another teacher. Back then, of course, you know, they could give kids swats on the rear end, and today it's so asinine that you can't discipline kids. I think that you should be able to. I mean, it didn't hurt me any, but I didn't get disciplined much because I didn't do any bad stuff. But the thing was, I remember this one. I'm trying to remember his name. Anyway, if you weren't doing something right, he always had a stick and he had rubber bands on the end of it. He'd tap you on the head. It didn't hurt. He just got your attention.
And that drafting board, what happened to that? Do you know?
I have no idea whatever happened to it.
But you did take it home. So.
Yeah, I took it home.
And then what? I have a pig that you made, and RL has a rolling pin, like a pig cutting board, and you have a rolling pin. Did you make that in his class, or? No,
I see. I don't remember where I made that. I think I made it in the class, yeah. Yeah, this is a wood shop class. And I liked wood shop, it was interesting. So.
Were they both made in the same class? Or
yeah.
2 different classes?
Yeah, same class, yeah. So it was interesting. I liked shop there. And many of my friends that I knew there, a few of them are still around. Quite a number of them have died.
This is high school?
That I went to junior high with.
Yeah, and then that would be a good time to ask about your kind of lifelong friends like Ted Volkart and them. Wasn't there kind of
Ted Volkart I met when I was in this grammar school, and I've known him all my life, and I still talk to him every week or two. He lives up in Lytle Creek, and that's about, well, at church, there's a friend of mine at church, Ron Seymour, and he graduated with me at high school, and he does the video, or I do the video, but he does the video part of PowerPoint, and so I see him every week, and he's a real nice friend. He lost his wife many years ago. So.
Now you said you liked the wood shop. What kind of got you interested in more the mechanical realm of things, or even electronic type of things?
Well, I don't know. I think I always worked on math in high school. Did a lot of math, and I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed. I took the Smith Hughes course. Probably don't even know what that is, a Smith Hughes course, and that was, we had six classes per day at high school.
What was it?
And the Smith Hughes class was a machine shop. So I took Smith Hughes class three periods a day for three years, and so that's what got me started in the machine shop. and that's where I started way back when I got into aerospace. So that was interesting.
What sort of other things were you involved in growing up, as far as
Well, I
sports or hobbies or whatever?
I played football and varsity football in high school, and besides everything else, and I was one of the, back then I was one of the very few guys that had an automobile, even in first grade of high school. Hardly any of the guys had cars.
And why was that? Why were you lucky enough to have a car?
Well, because I worked during the summer for money and made enough money to buy a car.
And you bought a what?
Oh gosh, several cars, old clunkers, and then I'd fix them up, sell them, and make money on them, and
So you kept trading up?
yeah, trading up.
What kind of job?
And I ended up with a car better than my parents had, which was kind of ironic. You taking the kids of today, I ended up with an Oldsmobile, because cars were hard to come by, because World War II took all the cars from all the people, and I was fortunate enough. I had a, oh gosh, I think it was a 38 or 39 Oldsmobile, and I fixed it all up, and that was a better car than my parents had. All they had was the 33 Dodge that my grandfather came out here, and then he died, and that's the only car they had. And it was a 33 Dodge. And anyway, when I first had my Oldsmobile, why, I would have to go to my dad and ask him for the keys to my car. He didn't. And so when I wanted to use it, I had to ask him for the keys. I couldn't, he just didn't give them to me. Finally, one day I told him, I said, well, isn't it my car? He threw the keys at me, he says, keep them. So he was all bent out of shape about that.
Was that just parent control, or?
I don't know if he was just trying to control me or keep me from accident, or I don't really know. It's hard telling. It's hard telling what he was trying to do. I don't know.
And you said you worked to get that first car. Do you remember what that first job was?
Oh gosh. Really picking at the back of the brain. Well, the first car I had was a Model A. Well, I had another old clunker before that.
But what job did you
What
work?
was your first job?
The first job,
Where you got an official paycheck?
oh, I didn't get any official. Well, okay, I'm thinking. First job I had, as I recall, it was a job washing dishes for Thrifty on 3rd and E. I washed dishes at Thrifty drugstore
For the lunch counter?
for the lunch counter.
Really? And you were how old?
Oh gosh, I don't know, 15, 16. I mean, in today's world, they wouldn't stand still for that. Right? Hello?
And that's how you made money to buy the car? Was
Yeah,
saving
well,
your money?
the Model A I bought for 40, 50 bucks. And I think I was making like Thrifties, I was making maybe 45 cents an hour.
But how much was a gallon of gas? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, it was 12 cents a gallon. Pretty cheap. And so that was one of the first jobs. Then I worked at the pre-cooler, which is the icing plant out there on West Rialto.
Pre-cooler?
Pre-cooler, where they cooled refrigerator cars they would take the boxcars and fill them with oranges, and then they would cool them with refrigeration, and then they would take, on each end of them, they'd take and fill them full of ice, a container, and then they'd dump salt on there. Then they would hook them to the train, and man, zippo, they were run back east. That's how they got the oranges. But that was, I worked in the shop in the pre-cooler, and they had a, that's torn down now, it's gone. Because the orange business in today's world is zippo, you know.
Do you remember what job after that you had?
Well, let's see. I worked at Thrifty's, then I worked at the pre-cooler, and then where else did I work? Got whatever I could get. Trying to think. I worked at Benny Giebler's. That was one of our neighbors across the street from us when we lived on Rialto, only down by Mount Vernon. So I worked for him for a while.
And what type of business did he have?
Well, he had a machine shop, and I worked for him for a while, and he was a real nice guy. He went to school with Don, so that's kind of how I knew him.
What year did you graduate from San Bernardino High School?
47. 47.
And what did you do immediately after high school?
Cry a lot. No, after out of high school, then I got a job over in Colton, Concrete Conduit. They still there?
The Colton Cement Company.
Well, no, this is next door to them. They made cement pipes. I worked there a while, and then at that time is when your mother and I got married. We got married in Vegas.
How did you meet her? Start at the beginning of the story with her. Let's be.
Yeah, you need to back up the train a little bit.
Well, does it go backwards?
It better.
I met her before I got out of high school. I met her about a year before, 6 months before I got out of high school, and she moved in the little house behind 1024, and she lived there where her grandfather lived when he died. So
She lived there alone?
yeah, by herself. Well, heavens, the thing was about the size of this room. That was it.
I remember it, yeah.
Just a little bitty place. So I met her there, and she was working at that time at the Santa Fe shipping place over right there on 3rd Street.
So she rented that house from your parents?
Yeah, she rented from us. And I met her there, and then she moved. She was there only a couple, 3 months, and then she found a nicer place, which I can't blame her, over in Colton. And so I met her there, and then we started going together. And she was working at the Santa Fe shipping division, which was a trucking company, and she was working there doing bookwork. And she, of course, never even graduated from high school. She was, her mother shot herself, and then she was on her own since she was 11 or 12 years old, I think, on her own.
Yeah.
Was it love at first sight, or was it a love that grew?
Well, a little of both, I think. We got along good, and Mom and Dad liked her, but then we got married, and they found out that she had been married before, and so they got all bent out of shape about it, because she'd been married before, and you don't marry somebody who's been married before, right? And so Mom and Dad didn't speak to us for a couple of years. Took that long for them to come around. And it's nice to see the young people get married and have a new car and a new vehicle and a nice new house and all the furniture and all that. I'm tickled pink for them, but man, we never saw it that way. I came up the hard way. It was, I'm not complaining. I have to be thankful for what we have.
Where was the first place that you lived when you got married?
It was down right across from the Orange Show. It was about the size of this place, a little bigger, with a Murphy bed.
On Mill Street?
On Mill Street. Mill Street, east of East Street, about a block. The houses, apartments are still there. I'll take you there sometime. I mean, and I remember having Stubby there.
Really?
We had Stubby there.
Tell us about Stubby.
Yeah, Stubby the dog. That was some friend of hers gave her this puppy, and that was Stubby, and so we lived there.
And how long did you live there?
Oh, quite a while.
It was just a one-room place.
Just a one room. Murphy bed, and
And you were working where?
a bathroom, adjoining bathroom, and just a 3-foot kitchen, or for doing dishes and things like that. I mean, it was tiny, tiny.
Was it furnished then, or did you have your own furniture?
No, it was furnished.
How much a month did you pay for rent?
Oh, boy, I don't remember. I can remember that we were the cost of things, this will date you, of course. I can remember, because my folks never helped us in Nicholsworth. They wouldn't even speak to us. And I can remember cashing in milk bottles to buy a loaf of bread to live on. Milk bottles, which,
Yeah.
I don't know, 3 cents.
Were you working at all?
No, I was working at Concrete Conduit,
And Mom was working.
and she was working at the Santa Fe Shipping, and I was working at Concrete Conduit. And I got, when we was living at this apartment, this little bitty 2x4 shack, and I got sicker than a dog. That's where I first got strep throat. And I was so sick, and back then, it didn't happen that way, but back then, a doctor even came out. She got a doctor to come out and see me and give me something, I don't know what it was. And I was sick for, I don't know, at least a week or 10 days, and I went back to work, and they fired me because I was sick. What could I do? So then I went to work for McMahon's Furniture.
What'd you do there?
And what I did there, we went out and repossessed furniture at places that people wouldn't pay for it. And we'd pick it up and it would just be junk. But we had to repossess it. I mean, and McMahon's Furniture was a big furniture outfit back in those days. And I remember we got a load of couches like this here in at McMahon's, you know, a truckload. And all day long, first couple of days there, had to carry by hand couches up to the 4th floor, upstairs. And by the time I got home, I was dead tired.
Was this the warehouse, or was this places where people lived?
No, this was the 4th floor is where they stored these couches. I worked all day, I don't know, maybe a couple of days, unloading these couches, carrying them up these stairs, walking back down, carrying them up. My legs were killing me. So it was, that was one of the toughest jobs I've ever had. But I had to work because there was absolutely no work. That was after World War II, and you couldn't find work. The work was so scarce, and if a job showed up, the servicemen coming back from the service, they got first preference, and I don't blame them. Backing up there, I was just at the age to where I was,
Yeah, why weren't you involved in that military effort? You were...
well, that's what I was going to tell you. I could see the handwriting on the wall that I would be either drafted or have to go. So I went down and signed up, and I took my physical and got ready to go in the service. And I signed up for the Merchant Marine. And I signed up, and I got all set. I was to report the next week, a week or 10 days later, and I kind of put it off going back down there. This was down in Los Angeles. So I put it off going down there until I just fiddled around for a couple, 3 more days, and guess what? The war ended. I was that close that I would have been in the service. And I never forget being in the backyard of the folks' house there in Rialto when the war ended. These airplanes was flying over, and they'd just dive down and pull up, and I mean really low, big bombers, and they were just doing gyrations and everything.
They were just showing
Celebrating?
off.
And they were celebrating the war's end, and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
I didn't know why they were doing it, because back then, of course, we didn't have television, and if we wanted to see news, we had to go to the theater to see video news. All we could see or hear would be on the radio. That was it. So when the war ended, these bombers came over. They were just buzzing the town like it was going out of style, and I couldn't figure out why.
Were they from Norton
Yeah,
Air Force Base?
yeah. They were big 4-engine bombers. So that was interesting.
I'm
That'd be
curious-
nice to have movies of that, but
Wow.
I mean, we didn't have. My folks they were poor. They didn't have much. So we were lucky we went all the way, backtracking a little bit. We went all the way through the war, and people today, I look, you go to Walmart, you go to Costco, and you see shelves and stacks of commodities and food. And back then, hey, we were rationed tires and sugar and gasoline and all those things were rationed. And unless you had the ration stamps, you couldn't buy them. Sugar was rationed. Meat. I mean, I know you guys don't know about that, but it was a little tough going. But I know what it is. It's like living in that little shack. I have to praise the Lord for where we're at today, because my parents had nothing. They left us a few bucks, but I mean it was nothing compared to what prices are today in the 2009. Anyway, what was the other question?
Well, I was curious, did you have any other significant girlfriends before Mom, or who was the first girl you kissed?
I had 2 or 3, yeah. I had this one girl, Jackie, that I was going with. I went with her before Mom, and I thought I would marry her, but her folks met my folks, and that was like, fire.
Oil and water?
Yeah, oil and water. They didn't want anything to do with anybody that was a Christian, and so that killed that. And we went together quite a while, and she ended up marrying a guy that she went with before me, and he was out of the same class, high school. Then one of the other girls I went with her, because I had a car when I was in junior high. About the last year of junior high, I went with this girl, and she was a girl that lived up there where the folks lived, there on North G Street, and she just lived a couple blocks away from them. And she's one of the coordinators of the class reunion. That's Serena. So she was she's still alive. But we didn't have anything serious going between her and I. We went together, but very pretty girl, black. And she lived down on King Street, down close to where between Ted and I. So that was about the extent of it. I didn't really go to any of the dances or the parties that the high school had, because I just didn't do that. I wasn't involved, and so you didn't meet as many that way.
Was that your choice, or was it?
Well, it was my choice. I didn't.
Your parents did not.
Well, they kind of taught me that way, but yet it was my choice. I could have went, but the reason I didn't is because these were just drunken brawls, all the time.
At the high school?
Yeah.
At the party? Or...
Yeah, at the parties at the high school, and so that's why I didn't go. I wasn't that the folks stopped me from going. I just didn't choose. It wasn't my choice to go that way.
Do you remember what happened after the war and after that job at that time, and where did you and Mom live and work?
Well,
and so
we finally moved up up to the high school below Highland, right behind the high school. We moved up there, and it was a nice little place, and we lived there. And I worked then Tolman, or not Tolman's, but Walter's Machine Shop there on East Street, which is the brother of the Mercedes dealer in Riverside, Walter's. Walter's Mercedes. So that I worked there quite a while.
Now, where you lived, was it an apartment? Was it a house that you rented?
It was a house, and then your mother's dad was sick, and he came and lived with us for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks.
He was
I
sick
remember
with
that.
what? Ill with what?
Huh?
He was ill with what?
I don't know what he was ill with. He needed some place to stay. He lived in Crestline.
Who's this?
Jack,
Mother's father.
your mother's father.
Her real father.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm curious. You mentioned.
And he was the water commissioner in Crestline. He was a real nice guy, but he didn't. We got married and we went up and told him about it, and he didn't. Oh, well, gee, that's nice. I mean, that's about all we got out of it. You know.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, though. I know you mentioned it, but when and where and under what circumstances did you end up getting married?
Jack Dunning was his name. Jack Dunning. And he was married at that time to, oh gosh, I can't remember her name. She was a Canadian woman, or a French woman, that's it.
Well, but when and where did you get married? Under what circumstances? How did you propose? I mean, how did that come about?
Well, we got married in Vegas. Okay.
By yourselves or with our family?
Okay, yeah, we got married in Vegas. A woman that your mother worked with at the trucking company, her friend and husband, they took us to Vegas, and we got married over there. So they were the only ones that we knew. And then we drove back the same day. We didn't even stay overnight. We didn't have the money to. I mean, it wasn't a matter of wanting to or not wanting to. There was no finances back then. I mean, money was tight.
So you were living at home, and then just one day you went down, took the drive, and
folks didn't know we did it till we got back.
What made you decide to get married? What was it? I mean, just one day you woke up and wanted to get married?
Well, we chose to. It wasn't a matter of forcing. I think we were married for, 3 years before we had Linda. We didn't have,
was there a particular reason why you chose to get married at that particular time, or just?
Well, no, we cared for each other. We enjoyed each other, and
What did you like in Mom? What drew you to her? What were her qualities?
well, she was real nice and loving, and she was, I don't know, I think she had a father, but he didn't really care whatever happened to her. And I think that she and I got together, and I think that she appreciated somebody caring for her. And I know before we got married, I went to the lawyer there in San Bernardino on E Street before she had already had
Florence?
and had given her away before I ever knew her.
Right.
And so we got together, and that's how I went to the lawyer with her, and she didn't want me to even go in the lawyer's office and to see him, not in the office, but to see him.
Did you know why she was going to the lawyer?
Yeah. And I asked her, I said, well, why don't we try to find a baby and, we can get it adopted back. It's none of your sewing blankety blank business. She didn't want any part of it. And every time I'd ask her about it, why, she got mad at me. So from then on, every few months I'd ask her about it, but she didn't want to have any part of it. She was mad about it, so. And I don't know who it was. I have no idea, don't care. But anyway, that's how that happened. So I went to the lawyer's office with her before we got married.
But she was married before, but she wasn't married when she had Florence, right? And he wasn't the father, obviously. The first.
Probably that's the way it is, but I can't really say. And any time I would ask her about any of these things, it's none of my damn business. And that's why I couldn't bring it up, so I learned very quickly to not ask any questions. And I understand why, because she had to shift for herself from 11 years old on, and she had to be tough about it. Let's face it. I mean, you think of somebody today, if you left somebody, the dad left her and Velma, rented an apartment for them and put them in it, and just got in the car and left and went to San Diego and left them there to take care of themselves. Why, if you did that today, why, they'd have you in jail tomorrow. Right?
Right.
So that's what happened. But I wasn't around.
Did she ask about Florence or say much through the years?
No. I couldn't say anything, and she wouldn't tell me anything. And I think just before she passed away, I caught her one time, and she was really sobbing over it. And I asked her, and she said, well, I just wondered whatever happened to that girl I had.
But she was not interested in finding her at that moment.
That was sometime shortly before she passed
That
away.
was very shortly, distant.
Very shortly.
Within weeks?
I would say within days.
Mm.
And that was I couldn't say anything. Before that, I could never say anything. And, going backwards, I don't know if I've ever told you kids this, but I always tried to have Rich come out there and work with me in the garage if I was working on a car or doing something, because I was trying to show him, and we kept saying to both of you guys, you needed to go to school and get your degree, But she resented something. I don't know what it was. I was never able to figure it out. But I got to a point to where I wouldn't ask Rich to come out and work with me in the garage because I got hell over it every time. She didn't want him to be involved in anything, and so I I finally got to the point to where I said to myself, well, the heck with it, I don't want an argument, I'll just leave it alone.
And
So
your
then-
purpose of having RL go into the garage to work with what, to learn skills or?
Yeah, to learn skills, you know, it wasn't that I had to have his help, but I feel that you need to have that relationship skills in order to operate in this kind of world, you know.
But she resented that, and
She
you're not
resented
sure
it.
why.
And I have no idea why she resented it.
She didn't want him working, she didn't want the
She didn't
time
want
spent-
him to get dirty.
Okay.
I don't know. You tell me, I can't figure it out.
But she, I mean, she verbally said that to you.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't just something that was indirectly said.
I don't
She-
want him out there.
Hmm.
Well, why not? Well, he'd get dirty. Well, I don't want him out there.
Was she worried maybe about his safety and just wouldn't say it?
I don't think so. I think she resented. I think she resented him being there, trying to do something or learn something. I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. So I really, I'm at wit's end. I was never able to figure that out.
But it wasn't that way concerning Linda. It was only me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, because I mean, I wouldn't take her out there
Yeah. True.
work on a car.
Yeah.
So, and like I said to her, I said, it's not that I want him to be a mechanic. I just want him to learn how to work on his car. If he was out in the middle of the desert after he's married and he doesn't know how to do something, he can at least get out of the desert and get home. And I felt like that those are things all men need to know and learn, but it's not that you want them to be working in that avenue as a avocation.
Right.
So,
Maybe she took it that way.
but I don't know if she took it that way or not. Then when I, of course, worked with the model airplanes, why, that was the same thing. She didn't want you to be out there fiddling with that and I have to say, in all sincerity, it wasn't that. I think there again, it taught me a lot of things and later in life to where I could be valuable at the job that I was at down at Rockwell, because when I went, that's what, well, even before we moved to Vallejo, while I was going to college, working on a degree, and I got absolutely no help from her. I mean, not for classes, but for, you know, saying it's a good thing or not a bad thing.
Well, support.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't get any help from her.
Mhm.
And I have to be honest, that's the only thing that got me working on a degree, you know. And yet I didn't get any help from her on that side of it. But I have to say that getting into the electronic side of the model airplanes, the radio controls, that's what got me started into the electronics thinking. I never did it before that.
From the mechanical to the electronic.
The mechanic, combining the mechanical and the electronics, that's what got me started, and that's what got me started going back to school, try to get a degree. So,
That was at Mount Sac? Mount Sac?
Yeah. And so I worked at that, and I went to college down Fullerton. But Anyway, I never got any help from Mom on that, which was unfortunate, I think, but so be it. I'm not complaining. But that's just one of those things. So during that time, of course, I was working in the at GD, General Dynamics, and I had a good job there, but working in the shop there, making all this new stuff, and then I got introduced to a lot of things there that a lot of people didn't get introduced to. So
That was when we lived in Walnut and you both worked at GD?
yeah, Then we moved to Upland on Vallejo.
I remember a few instances of when the union was on strike and going
Yeah,
to those.
we were on. That was because I was working there in the shop, and I had to be on strike. I mean, that was just the only. Well, I have to back up a minute. We lived in El Segundo before that, F-100 or F-86. So I made the first ones, machined them.
Stabilizers.
Hydraulic, and it was oh, you wouldn't believe how complicated it was. It was about yay long and that big, all kinds of ports,
Yeah.
pistons and all that. So I made the first one, the first body. That was the body of it, aluminum. It was not a casting, but a forging. So that was real good work. I enjoyed that.
So you took it from the engineer's drawings, and then
Yeah,
you're the one who
uh-huh.
made the first prototype.
Yeah, first prototype. I can't remember now when, but I worked at Pacific Aviation there for a couple of years. And then we went, your mother and I, we still didn't have Linda. And this incident with Don was, I think, after. Well, I was there at Pacific Aviation 2 years. Then I went to, your mother and I, we went on the mission field for several months.
And what mission field, or where was it that you actually...
6 months, we went to San Carlos Indian Reservation.
Where was that?
San Carlos,
What state?
Arizona. So we were over there for about 6 months. And,
What did you do?
What was that like and what did you do? What?
well, we were over there to, this was Assembly God Mission Station over there, right on the Indian Reservation. And we were helping this pastor, Billy Olson. We met him in San Bernardino, and we were helping him. I was driving the bus, and then your mother was helping with the kids and the pastor's wife. We were living underneath in the basement of the church at that time, and they had a house just a few feet away. Pastor did, and him and his wife and kids. So we were over there for about 6 months, and then we went out all the time praying for the sick and going out, and we would spend all day going out somewhere because it wasn't so far. It was just the roads. Roads were awful, and we'd go out and pray with different Indian people. This was strictly Indian, Cherokee Indians. So we did that for I don't know, 6 months.
Well, what kind of experiences or memories did you have of that?
Yeah, well, memories? Bad.
What made him bad?
Well, we had a good time. It was tough. It was, we weren't getting paid anything. When an Indian woman had to go to jail for whatever, she took her children with her, and they would take them in a pickup truck that had bars all the way around it and the top. And the Indian woman would take the kids by the legs and beat them against the bars and kill them. I mean, we ran into so many things that were not very funny. I mean,
What was
they lived like, the Indians over there, they lived like
Barbaric?
barbarians, yeah. They were, and you think, in this day and age, I'm talking in the 49, right in that area. So,
Well, they were pretty lawless, right? I mean, they just
Oh.
didn't live by any rules necessarily.
oh no, the deal is the Indians aren't supposed to drink because they are so wild when they drink. Well, the stores that were run by the government, they were selling the supplies so they could make Raisin Jack to drink. So, it was just one of those things.
So alcohol was a big issue there?
Alcohol was a big issue, and Billy and I would go to the hospital. They had a small hospital there. It was just a little bitty. San Carlos is about, I don't know, 75, 80 miles from east of Phoenix, east and north. But you had to go on a dirt road for many miles to get there. And so,
So the living conditions were kind of primitive?
worse than primitive. It was primitive.
I remember Mom and you telling us stories about scorpions and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Just,
scorpions and tarantulas and all that. We saw all of it.
outdoors, or what was your little
In the house,
in the basement? What was your basement apartment or
it's under
facilities
the
like?
church.
under the church, so it was,
You
it
had
was
furniture. You had food
a
cooked.
bed and a dresser, and that's about it. We didn't have much.
Was it wooden basement walls, or was it cement, or was
Cement.
it dirt floor?
Oh, it was just, I don't remember. Could have been dirt floor, I don't remember. So we lived that way. Didn't really complain that we had each other. And then at times we went to seminars up in Flagstaff and like tent meetings. And just Billy and I, the girls didn't go. So it was very primitive.
Was there any? You said there was all these hardship type of things, but was there any miracle that you?
Oh yeah, sure.
What would be one of those?
Sure,
that you
it was-
remember?
We went to the hospital, the small hospital there, and there was people healed, people accepting the Lord, and we'd go out to places where they were having a big powwow and they were having their Indian dances that they would call, and the medicine men would be running things. So it was a big fight between the medicine man and the Christian belief, and we were just trying to spread the gospel to the Indians only. There was just a handful of white people out there. The rest of them were Indians. They were.
Did you get along with them well, or was it?
Oh yeah, we got along with them well, but they were so crude and barbaric. I mean, even at that day, you say, well, they'd come out of the Stone Age. No, they didn't. They were still in the Stone Age. You know, so it was. I learned a lot how terrible they were, and how, you know, it was. I mean, we were always going and doing something to help somebody
in need. Somebody's fighting and
some
family violence. And
oh yeah, it was violence all the time, all over, and it was unfortunate, but that's the way it was.
So you weren't any.
We weren't in any danger.
Yeah.
No. I mean, but
anyway. You were happy when you left. And
yeah.
It was over.
So we came back to the folks' house for kind of a furlough, and we were intending on going back, but it wasn't that we were going to cut out on them. But then Billy came over and he said he didn't want us to come back, so we didn't. Well, I went to work for Hughes Aviation in Culver City, and I worked there for a little while, and they promised me a better job, and the job they gave me I didn't like because it wasn't what they promised me. So then I quit there, and I was there a couple of months. So then I went back to Pacific Aviation for another year, and then they went out on strike, and so we couldn't work. So then that's when I moved back. And in the meantime, we'd bought the 35-foot trailer that we had. We bought that, and we moved to the folks' house. And so when we moved there, then I went to GD and I got a job there. But I couldn't get a job there until the strike was over. And when the strike was over, then they hired me.
This was the machinist union?
Yeah. So I worked there 10 years at GD. And then I quit. And then I went to work in the research center there in Anaheim. We went to Manhattan Beach in the old junker trailer. Then we bought a bigger one because we had Linda, and we got the newer trailer, and then we had Linda there, and then we had Rich, and he was born in Hawthorne, and so then when they had the strike, then we moved the bigger trailer to the folks' house, and then when I got a job at GD, then we moved it to Walnut. Your mother was pregnant with Linda, and she chose the doctor, which was a chiropractor, not a per se doctor. So when she was ready to have you, then we went into the chiropractic hospital, which this doctor had a portion of, which was right there on the west side of E Street, north of Highland, about 2 blocks, still there. And you were there, and they tried to induce labor so she'd have you. And he came to me and he says, well, I think that we're going to have to take it cesarean. I said, well, could I have a second opinion of a doctor of my choice? And he said no. I says, okay. So I called an ambulance and had you moved to that other hospital, and she had you within an hour or two after we moved you.
And what did they do different?
Nothing. I feel that the Lord intervened and took care of it.
When you moved to and started working for Rockwell, what are some of the projects and some of the interesting experiences you remember there?
Worked with a guy named Carl Recknitzer. You've heard of him. The deep sea guy.
And what'd you do with him?
Well, we worked with deep sea diving vehicles.
Like the mini subs?
For exploration.
For exploration. Worked on a artificial heart machine.
What was that big thing you built in the garage that we helped you on, and that you brought here to San Bernardino on 5th Street by Valley Auto? I remember. What was that all about?
Well, that was a high vacuum.
Yeah, some sort of a vacuum thing.
Yeah, that was a evaporator, vacuum evaporator. I made that for a guy that used to work at Rockwell, and he worked at Bourne's in Riverside, and it was for Bourne's, which is the big outfit that makes all resistors, and variable resistors, and all that. So he wanted it cheap. He, kind of lost my shirt on it, but I made a few bucks because that's a technology that hardly anybody has any knowledge about, is high vacuum equipment.
What did it do? That piece of equipment?
Well, you pull a vacuum in the thing, and it's like pulling a vacuum, and like you're in outer space.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of a vacuum.
And it was used.
And then all you do is heat up different metals, and when you right here, you heat up water, and what happens to the water? It boils and it makes steam. Well, if you heat up metals in a vacuum, they boil off, and if you apply a certain voltage to things, well, then the particles, just the separate particles, then evaporate onto a piece of whatever you're putting in there. That's how you apply or make surfaces coated with metal. So that's called vacuum evaporation. Worked with electron beam microscopes. The electron beam microscopes that we had to be made even finer, so I redesigned them and had them rebuilt. They had to be designed so that you could move the tables and everything, and no vibration, and I mean it involves many different things, and I hold the patents on X-ray system that I designed and built there for making hybrid circuits that were really into the technology today. They're just coming out with, and Intel is just coming out with it. So I was into that 35 years ago,
Really?
and it's just now hitting the market.
Yeah, I remember, I'm sure Linda does
And the CMOS, you see all the digital cameras, and it says CMOS.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with that. CMOS, that's coated metal on sapphire. And RCA said it couldn't be done, and we developed it right there in the research center.
And what is that?
And here it is. CMOS is used in all the, well, CCDs, I worked with that. That's charge coupled device. And all the digital cameras now are either CCDs or CMOS. That's all they make. And so I worked with the forerunners on that.
And you worked on a lot of the laser beam technology.
And I worked on a lot of lasers. Worked on the first laser radar that anybody had ever made. Finally, it worked into a system that we could use a laser radar, and if there was no curtains on the windows and we were outside, a mile away, we could look through that and see somebody talking, and we could see what they were saying. So that was
A mile away?
as long as you could see it 5 miles away, it doesn't matter. If you look, into an office building where somebody's talking, we could tell what they're talking about with a laser radar. So it was, a really far out stuff. And
So you worked on the Air
worked
Force
on-
helmets, something.
yeah, I worked on the airplane helmet thing, and gosh, I remember seeing in our labs the first LED light emitting diodes way back then, and it was just just starting. We made them right there, LEDs.
Yeah, the first prototype.
And here it is, now they've got LED everything. Worked with a laser beam that was that big around.
That was the underground one, wasn't
Underground, and if we had big pieces of, beef that we'd pass by them, and it'd chop them right off, just like that. And they were thinking about putting it in an airplane to, for different things. And lo and behold, today I read where they're doing it. And
They
a lot
use
of-
it as what, for destructive or just for targeting?
Yeah, for destruction. Well, to mess up a satellite or,
Nuclear weapon too.
yeah. But this thing has to be mounted, and because it takes so much power to run it, it has to be mounted in something where it can only put out blast of, for a few seconds, and it's in a 747. Has to be that big, to handle it. So it's nothing small. Worked on the ablation biscuits that go under the space shuttle. Worked on them.
That's the panels?
The radiation protection biscuits that go underneath.
Yeah.
I got a sample of one of those
That's not the tiles, is it?
tiles.
Yeah.
Oh, the ones that they're always inspecting now that
Yeah.
break off,
Mhm.
huh? From
And the
foam.
reason is I can show you one. They'll take this humongous temperatures, but I used a laser beam to test these things with, and use a T laser, what they call TEA laser, to measure radiation from different materials to see if it would how much reflection it had, and that would be for a stealth airplane. So I worked on that. I mean, I worked on that. I had 2 jobs there. I worked my regular job, and then I done other things because they needed my assistance. And, you know, it just took time. And they wanted me, you know, all the time there, but didn't have the time to put in 16 hours a day doing everything, so that's the way it was. But the tiles on a space shuttle are they're so fragile, but as far as taking the temperature when they come back into space, they take the temperature. That's not the problem. The problem is the cryogenic
The freezing of the fuel.
freezing of the fuel. The fuel that they use is like, you know, 250 degrees below zero. It's what they use are liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, and all that is cryogenic. In other words, it's
Sub-zero.
below zero, like 200 to 300 degrees below zero. And I worked with a lot of cryogenics. Designed one of the first spectrophotometers that you would ever have to measure optical components at cryogenic temperatures. So I worked on that, worked on the U-2, the SR-71. We made all those things for that, for the spy satellites. So there's a lot of secret stuff there, but it's not secret anymore because it's old hat. But it was interesting work. I loved it. Worked on Lalo, which was a balloon that they sent up, and we used liquid helium, which is 430 degrees below zero. When you evacuate it, that it's only about 3 or 4 degrees below zero, but then when you evacuate it, it makes it colder. So the sensors that we had, we would evacuate it, and what we used that for was a balloon that would go up in the air, and when the balloon was up in the air, then it would look at the atmosphere, and when somebody would shoot a missile through the atmosphere, it's like punching a hole in a piece of paper with a pencil. You would see it punch the hole because the atmosphere is black at infrared temperatures. And so then when you punch the hole, you could see when a satellite's coming through, or a missile, satellite or whatever. So that was for protection for our survival over here. I mean, there's just dozens of things I worked with. So that was interesting work. So anyway, it's been an interesting life. Can't complain. I worked on the weaving machine. I've got some samples if you ever want to see them, like samples of the knitting machine material. I mean the knitting machine, which is a double knit.
Yeah.
And then I worked on the weaving machine, which is like fabric. And so we made that. We made both of them because Rockwell makes the machines, and they sell them by the thousands. And what we did, we made it so that electronically they could change from one pattern to another pattern, because normally it would take them hours, many hours to change that pattern, but they could do it electronically just by the flip of the switch almost.
Yeah.
And so I worked on the weaving machine and the knitting machine. And that was interesting. Brakes that we have today in the cars, we were working on that so many years ago.
Anti-lock braking system.
Anti-lock brakes,
ABS.
yeah.
Yeah.
Worked on that many years ago. Went to Maine on circuit boards because Maine made all of our MX circuit boards, and they were working. They made the 10 and 15 layer circuit boards. Any circuit board you see in stuff today is 2 layers. I'm talking about 15 layers, and those were real complicated circuit boards that went on the MX missile.
Huh.
And so they had problems with them, and I went back there, and then I developed a shaving machine, and I went back because they couldn't keep the boards flat. So I went back there and watched them work, and I figured out what was the problem and took care of it. It was no big deal. And then in El Paso, I worked with what we call, it's electronic soldering, to solder components onto a circuit board. So then they would place the electronic components, resistors, capacitors, integrated circuits, or anything onto the circuit board. They'd epoxy them on there, and then to solder the connections that these parts had, these components. Then I developed the soldering machine to solder these instantaneously, all of the connections, all of them at one time. So what we did, we control this with a computer, and the computer would put these boards down into this liquid. This liquid is a liquid that you can use when it's heated up. It would melt the solder, and you just put it down there and pull it up, and they're all done. But the liquid that we used was a liquid that was specifically designed so that you could, in emergency sake, you could inject it into the bloodstream of a human and use it to fill the capacity. If they lost a lot of blood,
Oh my gosh.
you could put it in there for temporary, because if they lost, several pints of blood, you could fill it with this stuff, and they could use it in there so that your heart wouldn't fail and you'd keep circulating your blood. And then as soon as you could, you take it out and remove it and put blood back in its position. So that's the kind of liquid it was. So that was interesting. So
Were you ever upset that you were never personally credited for a lot of these things that you came up with and worked on and all that? I mean, I know that's kind of a thing in, a lot of scientific corporate circles where, you're basically an employee and you work for them, and you can invent something, but you own nothing and your name's not even attached to it.
well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, that's kind of the way it was. Like I developed a phosphoric coated material to detect laser beams, so that when you shine a laser on it, then you shine a black light on it, you could see the laser beam, only if the black light was on it. And so from that, we were able to develop a spectrometer to read the frequency of the laser. Well, I was in on the ground floor and developed that. And this one guy, John Mackin, he came to me one day and he said, well, you know, how'd you like to work for me? And I didn't know what he was digging at. Well, yeah, John. So shortly after he quit, he left, and he's got that business of that detection stuff today. He's up north.
What company is it, or was it?
Oh, I can't remember now what he calls his company, but it's John Mackin. Anyway, he stole the thing from me, but that's the way life goes. Well, we'll catch you next phase.
Yeah,
we'll do
definitely.
part 2. So
You put that within your paper.
Yeah.
Just keep them together.
okay.
I mean, I've forgotten a lot of stuff that I worked with.
Sounds like you
Well,
remembered a lot.
I'd like to ask more about some of the experiences and stories and stuff that you've told us in the past that we could kind of capture on tape, because if I don't capture them and you don't say them, we'll never remember them, you know, like going forward. Just things about, you know, history and our mom and our family and different people and stuff. I remember you sharing lots of things, but it's like, it's, you know, it's not something you can easily remember.
You
Yeah.
can't easily remember. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, for instance, the time, like, when you and Don and Grandpa, maybe, I don't remember, what you tore apart the transmission, and just because you wanted to find out how it worked, and then Mom came out and was all upset, and what are you doing, and the car was all in pieces, and you were just saying something about, oh, we just wanted to take it apart to see how it worked, you know, or when
Well, we might have said that, but we took it apart because it was broken.
oh well,
But we might have said that to her.
yeah, or like the times in later years when Mom was sick and stuff, and you said she had that sort of that dream and that premonition about Donna and Larry and stuff, you know,
Yeah.
those kind of things that you want to capture, because otherwise nobody's ever going to remember any of that stuff, you know.
Yeah, I could tell about that.
That's the kind of stuff I think we'd like to hear a lot more of next time.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
But that's the way it goes.
It's a wrap.
Yeah,
It's a what?
It's a wrap.
a wrap.